The wind was sharp that night, blowing across the empty plains like a cold warning. Luke Harding, a quiet cowboy who lived far from town, was finishing his last chore of the day. He had just tied his horse inside the small barn when he heard the sky rumble with distant thunder. The wind pushed dust across the yard, rattling the wooden shutters of his cabin. Usually these sounds didn't bother him. He had lived alone for many years. But tonight, something felt different. There was a strange stillness mixed with the storm, as if the land itself was waiting for something. Luke went inside his cabin, hung his hat on a hook by the door, and placed a pot of water on the stove. He was about to sit beside the heat when a sudden soft knock reached his ears. It was gentle, almost too gentle for the weather outside. For a moment he wondered if he imagined it, but then it came again, 3 small, careful taps. He stood up slowly, confused. No one ever visited him at night. Travelers avoided this area, and townsfolk rarely rode this far unless they had a reason. Luke opened the door just a few inches first, out of caution, letting the warm light spill onto the porch. What he saw made him open it fully without thinking. An old Apache woman stood on the porch, wrapped in a thin blanket that fluttered in the wind. Her braided hair had come undone in some places, and her hands shook from cold and exhaustion. On either side of her were 2 younger women, maybe in their early 20s. Their clothes were dusty, their faces tired, and they leaned slightly toward each other as if supporting one another just to stand. Behind them lay only darkness and open land. The older woman bowed her head respectfully and spoke in a shaky voice. "No one will shelter us. We have walked since sunrise. Please, let us rest on your porch if nothing else." Luke looked at them closely. He saw fear, exhaustion, and something deeper, shame, as if they felt guilty for even asking. He realized they were truly desperate. Their bare feet were covered with dust up to their ankles, and the younger women's shoulders drooped with fatigue. He could not ignore such a sight. "Come inside," Luke said softly. "The wind is too strong to stand out here." The old woman's eyes widened a little, surprised by his kindness. The daughters looked at each other, unsure if they should step forward. It was common for them to be turned away or spoken to harshly by strangers. They hesitated until Luke gave a small nod of reassurance. Slowly, they stepped inside. The warmth of the cabin washed over them, and the daughters let out quiet breaths of relief. Luke closed the door behind them, locking out the cold night and the howling wind. He guided them toward the small fireplace where embers still glowed. "Sit. Warm yourselves," he said gently. The daughters knelt near the fire, holding their hands close to the heat. The older woman remained standing for a moment, unsure of the rules of this house, until Luke offered her a chair. She accepted it with a grateful nod. Luke went to the stove, poured warm water into 3 metal cups, and handed them one by one. The daughters drank slowly, as if savoring warmth for the first time in hours. Only then did Luke speak. "My name is Luke Harding. You don't have to be afraid here." The older woman bowed her head again. "I am Nalin," she said softly. "These are my daughters, Alakwa and Sani." The girls lifted their eyes briefly to acknowledge him before lowering them again, still shy and cautious. Luke sat on the edge of his bed, keeping his distance so they didn't feel crowded. "What happened? Why are you out so late in this weather?" Nalin took a deep breath, gathering strength. "Our camp was forced to move," she explained. "Many families left. We have no home now. We tried to ask for help, but no one would open their door." Luke felt a tightening in his chest. He knew how the townspeople behaved toward Apache families, fearful, suspicious, misled by old stories and rumors. Yet these 3 women looked far from dangerous. They looked like people simply trying to survive. Alakwa, the elder daughter, spoke in a soft voice. We only wanted a safe place for the night. We do not want trouble. Sani, the younger one, shivered slightly as the cold slowly left her body. Her eyes held a quiet sadness, as if she had seen too much hardship for someone so young. Luke's gaze moved from one face to another. They were tired, hungry, and frightened, but also polite and respectful. He knew they chose his door for a reason. Nalin confirmed it when she said, We heard from a traveler that you are a kind man. We hoped it was true. Luke didn't know who had said that about him, but he felt a humble warmth at the thought. He stood up and added more wood to the fire, letting the flames grow. The daughters watched him carefully, unsure if he would change his mind, but he only made the room warmer. You can rest here tonight, he said. You're safe. Nalin's shoulders relaxed for the first time since she arrived. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly with relief. Luke gave them a simple meal: bread, dried meat, and warm tea. They ate slowly, trying not to appear greedy, even though it was clear they hadn't eaten a full meal in a long time. After they finished, the daughters helped clean the table, even though their hands still trembled from exhaustion. Luke tried to stop them, but Nalin gently said, They want to show respect. You opened your door when no one else would. Luke felt a lump in his throat. For years he had lived in silence, cut off from the world by choice, but that night something shifted. The quiet cabin felt different, alive, warm, and filled with gentle voices. When it grew late, Luke set up a place for them to sleep. He laid out extra blankets near the fire. The daughters thanked him in soft voices, and Nalin placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of deep gratitude. You have saved us from the cold, she said. We will remember this kindness. Luke simply nodded, but inside his heart felt heavier than before. He realized these three women were not just looking for a place to sleep. They were looking for safety, dignity, and a chance to breathe without fear. As the storm outside grew louder, Luke sat near the window, watching the lightning spread across the dark sky. Behind him, he heard the soft breathing of the daughters as they finally rested. Nalin slept sitting up, as if she wanted to stay alert to protect her children even in sleep. Luke looked at them and wondered what hardships had driven them so far from home, what dangers they had faced on the road, and why the world had become so unkind to them. He also wondered why they trusted him, a stranger, with their safety. But when he remembered Nalin's quiet words, "You have a kind heart," he felt something warm spread through him. He didn't know it yet, but the simple act of opening his door that night was about to change all their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. The morning light slowly entered Luke's small cabin, touching the walls with a soft golden glow. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving the land quiet and still. Luke woke early, as he always did, expecting to find his cabin silent. But today, the first thing he heard was the gentle sound of someone moving near the stove. When he opened his eyes, he saw Nalin, the old Apache woman, kneeling beside the small pot, shaping simple corn cakes with careful hands. The daughters were awake too. Sani was sweeping the floor with a handmade broom she must have carried in her bundle, and Alakwa was folding the blankets neatly as if she had lived here for years. They moved softly, respectfully, trying not to disturb him. Luke sat up, surprised. Usually guests, when he ever had them, rested as long as they could. But these three women were already working, trying to repay kindness with action. It touched him more than he expected. "You don't have to do all that," he said gently. Nalin turned her head and smiled with tired but grateful eyes. "You shared your fire, your home. We should help keep it clean." Her voice carried sincerity, not obligation. She wasn't doing it because she feared being thrown out. She was doing it to show respect. Luke watched them for a moment and realized that despite everything they had endured, they still held dignity close, refusing to be a burden on anyone. It made him admire them even more. He got up and stepped outside for a moment. The air was crisp, fresh after the storm. His small ranch looked peaceful, almost untouched by the harsh night before. He breathed deeply, then returned inside to the warm smell of corn cooking on the stove. Nalin offered him one of the small cakes. "Eat," she said. "You gave us food last night. Let us give you something this morning." Luke accepted it, feeling a quiet warmth inside. The daughters watched him carefully, as if waiting to see if he liked it. When he nodded with a smile, both Alakwa and Sani looked relieved, almost proud. After breakfast, Luke poured coffee for himself and sat on a wooden stool. Nalin joined him. The daughters stayed busy nearby, but they listened closely. Luke asked gently, "If it's all right, I want to understand what happened. Why did you have to leave your home?" Nalin's face softened with sadness. She held her cup tightly. "Our tribe was small," she began. "Peaceful. We lived far from trouble. But recently, fear rose between our people and some settlers. Misunderstandings, blame, words twisted by others." She paused, trying to keep her emotions steady. "Some families left the area. Others stayed but felt unsafe. My daughters and we stayed as long as we could. But one day, we woke and found our shelter torn apart. No one claimed it. But we knew we were not wanted." Luke felt anger simmer quietly in his chest, not toward anyone she named, but toward the unfairness of it all. He had seen prejudice before, but seeing its effect on real faces, real lives, made it heavier. Alakwa spoke softly. "We tried to go to another settlement, but when people saw us, they closed their doors. They thought we were trouble." Sani added in her quiet voice, "We only wanted a safe place to sleep." Luke looked at the two young women. Their eyes carried deep exhaustion, but also bravery. They had walked for miles without giving up. "I'm sorry," Luke said, meaning each word. "No one should be treated that way." Nalin placed a steady hand on her daughters' backs. "We came to your door because we heard you help those in need, even if they are strangers." Luke felt a strange mix of pride and responsibility. He didn't know who had spoken kindly of him, but he was grateful they had. These women deserved someone to treat them with fairness. The morning passed quietly. Luke repaired a broken fence outside, and the daughters joined him without being asked. They picked up fallen branches, carried tools, and helped gather the scattered pieces of wood the storm had blown around. Though they moved slowly from tiredness, their efforts were sincere. "Are you sure you want to work?" Luke asked gently. Alakwa nodded. "Work keeps us calm." Sani gave a small smile. "And it helps you." Luke let them continue, but he watched carefully, wanting to ensure they didn't push themselves too hard. Later in the afternoon, Luke took them to the creek behind the ranch so they could wash their clothes. The water was cold but clean. The daughters knelt at the edge, scrubbing their garments with practiced motions. Nalin washed her blanket slowly, pausing at times due to her aching hands. Luke stood a short distance away, keeping watch in case anyone came by. He noticed how Alakwa kept looking over her shoulder, nervous someone might appear and speak harshly again. Sani worked quietly, but her tense shoulders showed she was ready to flee at any moment. "You're safe here," Luke said softly, his voice steady. Alakwa looked up at him, unsure. "Are you certain? If people see us near your land, they may trouble you." Luke shook his head. "If anyone has a problem, they can talk to me. You did nothing wrong." The daughters exchanged a look, half disbelief, half comfort. It had been a long time since they heard such words from a stranger. When they finished washing, they placed their clothes on warm rocks to dry. The sun felt good on their faces, and for a brief moment, They relaxed. Luke could see them unwind little by little, like knots slowly loosening after days of tension. They returned to the cabin in the early evening. Nalin insisted on preparing a meal with what she found in Luke's small pantry: beans, a little rice, and some herbs she carried with her. She cooked with steady, experienced hands. When the smell filled the cabin, Luke felt a strange sense of home, something he hadn't felt in a long time. As they sat together to eat, Nalin looked at Luke with gentle seriousness. "You opened your door without fear," she said softly. "We will not forget." Luke shook his head modestly. "Anyone would have helped." Nalin smiled sadly. "No, not anyone." The daughters lowered their eyes. They remembered the closed doors, the harsh looks, the long road behind them. Luke felt a deep respect rise for these women. They carried their struggles quietly, without anger or bitterness. They simply wanted safety. After dinner, Alakwa and Sani offered to wash the dishes. Luke watched them move around the small cabin, their motions careful and respectful. They belonged nowhere, yet they brought peace into every place they touched. When the dishes were done, Luke stepped outside for some fresh air. The sky was turning orange and purple as the sun lowered behind the hills. He thought about everything he had learned that day: how these women had been pushed away, how far they had walked, how they still found the strength to keep going. He felt protective in a way he hadn't expected. He wanted to help them find stability, not just temporary shelter, but he also knew that the world around them wasn't always kind. He heard soft footsteps behind him. It was Sani. She approached slowly, holding her hands together nervously. "Thank you," she said in her gentle voice, "for not turning us away." Luke nodded. "You don't need to thank me. Anyone with a heart would have done the same." Sani looked down. "Many people have hearts. They just don't use them for us." Luke didn't know what to say to that. The truth in her words hurt. Later that night, as the cabin grew quiet again, Luke prepared a space in the barn where they could sleep more comfortably. He placed fresh hay, blankets, and a small lantern so they wouldn't be in darkness. When he guided them there, the daughters were surprised at how clean and warm he made the place. Nalin touched the wall gently, as if thanking the barn itself. "This is more kindness than we have seen in a long time," she whispered. Luke felt something settle inside him, a decision, though he hadn't spoken it aloud. He wasn't going to let anything happen to these three. As long as they stayed on his land, he would protect them, no matter what anyone thought. Before they went to sleep, Nalin said quietly, "We will not forget this day, Luke Harding." Luke nodded and stepped out into the night. The stars were bright above him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone on his ranch. He felt a new purpose forming in his heart, even though he didn't yet know where it would lead. But one thing was clear. Trust had begun to grow between him and the three women who had knocked on his door in the dark. And that trust would soon be tested in ways none of them could see coming. The next few days passed quietly at Luke Harding's ranch. The three Apache women grew more comfortable in the cabin and around the barn. Nalin moved carefully, yet with an air of quiet authority, while Alakwa and Sani became part of the daily rhythm of chores and care. Luke watched them closely, noting their courage and patience. He could see they were still wary of outsiders, but he felt proud that they had trusted him enough to stay. One afternoon, Luke rode into the nearby town to pick up supplies. The air was hot and dry, and dust swirled across the streets. As he entered the general store, he overheard two men whispering near the counter. Their words made his stomach tighten. "Did you hear? I saw 3 Apache women walking near Harding's ranch. Wonder what he's doing letting them stay." "They're trouble," the other man said. "Always brings trouble. Maybe he's asking for it." Luke clenched his jaw, feeling both anger and concern. He had seen suspicion and fear twist the hearts of townsfolk before, but he hadn't expected it to reach his small sanctuary so quickly. He bought what he needed and left quietly, knowing the gossip could follow him home. When he returned to the ranch, he noticed the daughters fetching water from the creek and Nalin tending the small garden she had begun behind the barn. The sun reflected off the drying laundry, and the land seemed calm, but Luke sensed that trouble might not stay away for long. He called the women together. "There are people in town who might not understand why you are here. They may come to the ranch to question you, or worse. You need to stay inside for now." The daughters exchanged worried glances. "Do you think they will hurt us?" Sanny asked quietly. Luke shook his head. "I will not let anyone harm you. You are safe as long as you stay on my land." Nalin placed a steady hand on her daughter's shoulders. "We will follow your guidance," she said. "We trust you." That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, Luke heard the sound of hooves approaching his gate. He stepped outside to meet them, his heart beating faster than usual. Two men from town rode slowly up, faces hard, eyes filled with suspicion. Luke dismounted calmly. "What brings you here?" he asked. "We heard Apache women are staying on your property," one said sharply. "You can't be serious about this, Harding. People in town won't allow it." Luke kept his voice steady. "They are not harming anyone. They need shelter. That's all. I will protect them, and no one will disturb them while they are here." The men scowled. "You can't just ignore the law and let them stay. People will talk, and trouble will come to your ranch." Nalin stepped forward, surprising Luke. She spoke in a voice both firm and calm, though it trembled slightly with emotion. "We only want safety for my daughters," she said. "We do not seek trouble, only shelter. We have nowhere else to go. Please allow us to stay." The men paused, looking at her closely. They saw courage in her eyes, a dignity that did not belong to a frightened, weak person. For a moment, their harsh expressions softened, though their fear of public opinion still lingered. Luke added quietly, "I take responsibility for them. They will not leave my land unless I say so. You can leave now, or talk to me calmly, but no one will harm them." The men looked at each other, then nodded reluctantly. "We will leave. But Harding, don't expect everyone to accept this." They turned their horses and rode away, leaving a tense silence in their wake. Luke exhaled slowly, feeling both relief and a lingering worry. He knew the daughters were still fearful, though they tried to hide it. Inside the cabin, Alakwa and Sani held hands tightly. Nalin sat by them, speaking softly. "They are gone. You are safe now. You have shelter." Sani's eyes filled with tears, not from fear this time, but from relief. "I didn't think anyone would help us," she whispered. Luke knelt beside them. "You are not alone anymore. You don't have to fear the world while you are here." The three women looked at him with gratitude, and for the first time in days, they laughed quietly. It was soft, fragile, but it carried a warmth that Luke had almost forgotten existed in the world. The following days passed with more normality. The daughters helped with chores, tending to the animals, gathering firewood, and cleaning the cabin. Nalin repaired clothing and cooked meals, always keeping a watchful eye over her daughters. Luke found himself smiling more often, enjoying their presence. He began to see the ranch not just as his home, but as a safe place for these women, and perhaps for himself as well. One morning, Luke noticed Alakwa planting seeds in the garden Nalin had started. Sani helped water them, and Nalin guided their hands, showing them how to space the plants properly. Luke watched quietly, seeing life slowly return to a place that had been quiet for so long. The small garden seemed a symbol of hope, and he realized that the women had brought more than themselves. They had brought life and purpose to his lonely land. Later, Luke taught the daughters how to care for the horses. Alakwa was cautious at first, hesitant to get too close, but Sani followed the instructions eagerly. By the end of the day, both girls were brushing the animals gently, speaking to them softly. Luke felt a deep satisfaction watching them bond with the creatures he cared for so dearly. Evenings were quieter, spent around the fire. They shared stories, though Nalin was careful to avoid anything that might invite danger. She spoke of her tribe's customs, the songs they used to sing, the small celebrations that had once marked their lives. The daughters listened intently, sometimes humming softly, connecting with memories they had feared were lost. Luke listened too, learning more about them than he had expected. He realized how much courage it took to survive each day in a world that was often unkind. Their strength was quiet, steady, and humble. But despite the calm, Luke knew that the world outside the ranch could be harsh. There were rumors in town, whispers at the general store, and neighbors who might not accept their presence. He understood that his decision to shelter them could bring trouble, yet he refused to let fear dictate his actions. One evening, as the sky turned deep orange and purple, Luke took a walk with Nalin. They moved slowly through the fields, the daughters trailing behind, curious but careful. "You are very brave," Luke said softly. "It is not easy to ask strangers for help, especially when you have been treated poorly before." Nalin nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It is not easy. But sometimes one has no choice, and sometimes one finds kindness where it is least expected." Luke smiled faintly. "I hope you know you are welcome here. You are safe and no one will push you away while I am here." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "We trust you, Luke Harding. That trust is not given lightly." Luke felt a heavy sense of responsibility settle over him. He knew that trust was fragile and that protecting them would require more than kind words. It would require vigilance, courage, and patience. But he also knew that he could not abandon them, not now. That night, as the stars sparkled in the wide, open sky, Luke sat outside his cabin, listening to the soft breathing of the daughters inside. Nalin had already gone to bed, her presence calming and reassuring. He felt a sense of duty he had not known before, a connection to lives that depended on him for safety. He thought of the men from town, the suspicion in their voices, the fear that people carried against those who were different. And he thought of these women, tired, brave, and respectful, and he knew he could not let them face that fear alone. Luke resolved silently that no matter what others thought, no matter what challenges came, he would protect them. The world might be cruel, but in his little corner of the plains, there would be safety, warmth, and respect. And slowly, as he looked toward the dark horizon, he felt a sense of hope that he had not allowed himself in years. He knew the days ahead might not be easy. People might continue to whisper. Fear might still lurk beyond the trees, and challenges could come without warning. But for now, there was peace. And for the first time in a long while, Luke felt that perhaps this quiet ranch, with its small cabin and barn, could become more than just his home. It could be a place where hope, courage, and trust could grow, even in a world that often denied them. Days turned into weeks at Luke Harding's ranch, and life slowly found a gentle rhythm. The three Apache women, Nalin and her daughters, Alakwa and Sani, grew more confident in their new surroundings. The initial fear that clung to them like a shadow had begun to fade, replaced by small smiles, quiet laughter, and a growing sense of safety. Luke noticed every change, every small step toward comfort, and he felt a warmth inside him he hadn't experienced in years. Alakwa had begun taking care of the animals almost entirely on her own. She brushed the horses with care, fed the chickens and goats, and even began learning the names and temperaments of each creature. Sani, though quieter, became adept at cooking simple meals with Nalin. Together, the two daughters worked tirelessly to maintain the cabin and barn, and Luke watched them with a mixture of pride and awe. Even Nalin seemed lighter, her movements less tense. Her eyes softer as she tended her daughters and the small garden she had planted behind the cabin. Luke had begun to think of them not as strangers, but as part of his small world. He realized that he no longer felt the loneliness that had pressed on him for so long. Their presence filled the ranch with life, their voices and laughter echoing across the open plains. The air seemed warmer, the sun brighter, and even the stars at night seemed to shine with a gentle glow he hadn't noticed before. But Luke also knew that life outside the ranch was not so kind. Rumors continued in town, whispers about the Apache women staying with Harding spreading slowly through the small settlement. Some neighbors came by, curious or disapproving, but Luke met them calmly and firmly. He explained that the women were not trouble, that they were hard-working, respectful, and needed shelter. Some still frowned and shook their heads, but none dared to force their opinions upon him or his guests. One day, a small group of townspeople came closer to the ranch than usual. Luke walked outside to meet them, his heart steady but alert. Nalin and her daughters stayed inside, watching quietly from the cabin window. The men approached, trying to appear confident, but Luke could see the doubt in their eyes. "They say you let Apache women stay here," one of the men said gruffly. "You're asking for trouble, Harding." Luke looked directly at him. "They are not asking for trouble, and neither am I. They are hard-working, respectful, and kind. I will not allow anyone to harm them or force them out." The men exchanged uneasy glances, clearly surprised by Luke's determination. We just don't understand. People don't usually help like this." Luke's voice was firm. "That doesn't make it wrong. They have done nothing but try to survive, and I will protect them. You may go back to town now. You are welcome to stay and see for yourself, but no harm will come to anyone here while I am in charge." The men lingered for a moment, then, seeing the steady resolve in Luke's eyes, they slowly turned and rode away. Alakwa and Sani let out quiet breaths of relief, and Nalin smiled softly at Luke through the cabin window. He returned her smile, feeling a deep sense of pride and responsibility. Weeks passed, and the ranch became a place of safety and growth. Nalin taught her daughters traditional skills from their Apache heritage. Alakwa learned how to weave small baskets, and Sani learned simple medicinal practices for minor injuries and sickness. They shared these skills with Luke, teaching him small ways to care for his animals and the land that were unfamiliar to him but deeply effective. In return, Luke taught them how to maintain fences, tend to crops, and care for the horses in ways they had not known. Together, they formed a bond built on trust, respect, and shared effort. One morning, Nalin approached Luke with a thoughtful expression. "We are grateful, Luke Harding. You have given us more than shelter. You have given us hope." Luke looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone would help if they could." Nalin shook her head gently. "No, not everyone would. You saw us and chose to care. That is rare." Luke nodded, humbled by her words. He realized that in helping them, he had found a purpose beyond his quiet, solitary life. These women had changed his world as much as he had changed theirs. As the weeks turned into months, the daughters continued to grow stronger and more confident. Sani began exploring the hills around the ranch, often accompanied by Luke on his walks. Alakwa became skilled at handling the animals and even started guiding Luke through tasks he had taken for granted. The bond between the four of them deepened each day. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Luke and Nalin stood outside, watching Alakwa and Sani laughing while they tended the small garden. "You have made their world brighter," Luke said softly. Nalin nodded. "And you have made mine brighter as well. I thought we would always wander, always fear. But here we can breathe." Luke smiled faintly. It is more than just shelter. It is safety, family, and life. The daughters joined them, carrying water for the evening chores. Luke watched them closely, seeing how their shoulders had straightened, how their eyes no longer darted with fear, how they moved with confidence rather than hesitation. They had changed, grown, and begun to belong. Nalin placed her hands on her daughters' heads and whispered something Luke could not hear. The girls smiled, and Luke felt a sense of completion he had not known he needed. He realized that the ranch had become a home, not just for him, but for them as well. The small shelter Luke had helped them build behind the barn had become their space. It was modest, but it was theirs. Nalin had placed herbs along the windows, Alakwa had arranged small decorations, and Sani had created a small corner for reading and writing. When the work was done, Nalin placed her hand on Luke's shoulder. "You gave us more than a roof," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You gave us dignity." Luke felt a quiet pride and happiness. For years he had lived alone, guarding himself from the world, but now he realized that opening his door to 3 women in need had brought life, hope, and joy into his home. He had protected them, and in doing so, he had discovered a new purpose for himself. The days continued in a rhythm of work and care, with the women helping, learning, and thriving. Luke noticed how the daughters began to laugh freely, how they shared stories of the past, how their voices brought a warmth to the ranch that had been missing for so long. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that they felt safe, that they had a place to belong. Neighbors began to see the change, too. Slowly, suspicion faded, replaced by respect. Those who had whispered and doubted now saw that the women were kind, respectful, and helpful. The ranch became a symbol of harmony, a place where trust and care overcame fear and prejudice. One evening, as the sky turned deep orange and purple, Luke, Nalin, Alakwa, and Sani stood together outside the cabin, watching the stars appear one by one. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of the plains and the small garden behind the barn. It was a peaceful moment, filled with gratitude and quiet joy. Luke spoke softly, looking at the 3 women. "You are safe here. You belong here, and we will face whatever comes together." Nalin smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "We will never forget your kindness. You gave us hope when all else failed." Alakwa and Sani stood beside her, holding hands. "Thank you," they said in unison, their voices strong and clear. Luke felt a deep contentment. He realized that opening his door that night had changed everything, not just for the women, but for himself as well. He had given shelter, yes, but he had also gained friendship, trust, and a sense of family he had never known he needed. As the stars shone above, the 4 of them stood together, connected by trust, courage, and the simple but profound truth that kindness can change lives. Luke knew that the world outside might still be harsh, that challenges could arise, but he also knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. And so, on that quiet ranch, far from the noise of the town, a new life began for the old Apache woman and her daughters. They had found safety, dignity, and hope. And Luke Harding, the quiet cowboy who had opened his door to strangers in need, had discovered a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the enduring strength of human kindness. The ranch was no longer just a place of work or solitude. It had become a haven. And as the night settled, Luke watched the 3 women move about the cabin and barn, their faces peaceful, their hearts free, and he felt the quiet joy of knowing that some doors, once opened, can change everything. The story of trust, courage, and kindness had found its place among the plains, and from that night onward, the cowboy and the 3 Apache women lived with hope, dignity, and the quiet, unwavering bond of a family chosen by fate and strengthened by the heart.